Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome all of you, and I especially want to welcome our witnesses to today's hearing. You've made yourself available to testify on relatively short notice, and I appreciate your willingness to assist the committee in carrying out our oversight responsibilities on this important issue. It was important that we met as soon as possible to get to the bottom of what has been going on and what NASA intends to do from this point forward. America's air transportation system is critical both to our nation's economic vitality and to our quality of life. However, it's no secret that the system faces increasing stresses as air traffic demand continues to grow, demand that is expected to increase by a factor of 2 or 3 by the year 2025. And those stresses make it even more important that all necessary steps are taken to maintain air safety. It's the right thing to do, and the American public expects it. Our citizens want to be sure that the government and the aviation industry are doing all that can be done to keep the air transportation system safe. That's why both the public and members of Congress alike have such a strong reaction to reports that NASA has been withholding an aviation safety survey database compiled by taxpayer dollars. NASA's explanation for its refusal to release the data was both troubling and unconvincing. Specifically, NASA has stated the data can't be released because, and I quote, it could materially affect the public confidence in and the commercial welfare of air carriers. Well, as I've said before, NASA needs to focus on maintaining and increasing the safety of the flying public, not protecting the commercial air carriers. And if NASA accomplishes that, and if we have a safe traveling environment, then the commercial air carriers, their situation will certainly be enhanced. Dr. Griffin has indicated that he agrees, and he will testify today that NASA will publicly release the NEOMS data. While we need to clarify just exactly what will be released and when, and I hope it will be soon, I'm pleased that he is taking that action, as his usual candor dictates. If scheduling this hearing helped bring about the change of direction at NASA, I think that it has been a constructive exercise of our oversight responsibilities. However, the issue we have to consider today goes beyond simply the release of data NASA is withholding. We also have a question of priorities. As former NTSB Chairman Jim Hall will testify, and again I quote, a true safety culture requires transparency and consistent vigilance. Numerous individuals familiar with this report have told us that it was envisioned as a long-term, continuing data collection and analysis effort to identify aviation accident precursors and safety trends. And several of our witnesses today will testify that it has the potential to provide information and insights unattainable from existing data sources. Therefore, by most accounts, the report appeared to be a promising avenue for ensuring that our nation's air transportation system would retain its impressive safety record in coming years. Yet whether it was due to shifting priorities, budgetary constraints, cultural differences between agencies, or something else, the report has largely been cast adrift by NASA and the FAA. I hope that one outcome of today's hearing will be the reconstruction of the report and project by NASA and the FAA. However, I think we in Congress also need to take a close look at NASA's overall aviation safety program to make sure that it still addresses the most relevant safety questions facing the nation's air transportation system. That's going to be one of the focuses of today's hearings and in the coming months. Maintaining and improving aviation safety is an important task for the federal government to accomplish. Working in partnership with the aviation industry, the stakes are high, and we need to get it right. We have a lot to do and to cover today, so I again welcome our witnesses in today's hearing, and I now yield to my good friend and colleague, Ranking Member Ralph Hall.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you. In today's hearing on NASA's National Aviation Operations Monitoring Service, NOAMS, is a timely hearing, especially considering the amount of scrutiny this program's received in the press. Several issues have arisen that bring into question the manner in which NASA closed out NAOMS, whether it achieved its original goals and the agency's refusal to provide raw survey data to the press in response to a Freedom of Information Act request. I'm optimistic that by the hearing's conclusion, and we hear these very capable men and women, if there are any on here, that we'll have a clear understanding regarding these and other pressing issues. And I do want to associate myself with NASA Administrator Mike Griffin's public statement that lays out the agency's philosophy on the treatment of research data. Like him, I believe NASA ought to be in the business of putting information in front of the public, not withholding it. And that being said, every care should be taken to protect the identities of survey respondents. NAOMS has promised pilots complete confidentiality to ensure their candid participation, and most folks believe that ought not to be breached. If information is disclosed that may allow respondents to be identified, there'd be a serious chilling effect in future survey efforts funded by the federal government, whether we're talking about pilots or other citizen groups who provide our government meaningful insight into a whole host of activities. In the case of NAOMS, we should be cognizant of striking a balance between transparency and confidentiality. I have the greatest faith in the administrator. I've been through half a dozen or so administrators since I've been up here, and I think there's none surpasses him in background, ability. He's a pilot, he's young, he's agile, and he's a lot of other things that are good for NASA. And I'm just really proud of him and honored to have him come before this committee. NASA should release the data, but, you know, to help us all gain a better understanding of what it's telling us, they ought to provide information, whether in the form of analysis, mythology, or reports, or give us a clear sense of context, whatever. But it's also important that the data be scrubbed, I think, to ensure errors are omitted. The errors out of there. I want to thank our witnesses for taking time from their busy schedules to appear before us this afternoon and acknowledge their hard work and preparation. All of us appreciate your willingness to be here. And Mr. Hall from Tennessee, we certainly welcome you, and thank you, sir. I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Hall from Texas. If there are additional members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record without objection. So ordered. And this time I would like to recognize our first panel. First we have Dr. Michael Griffin, who is the Administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and I will concur with Mr. Hall's accolades, even the youthfulness. And then we also have Mr. Jim Hall, who is a Managing Partner at Hall & Associates and is also the former Chairman of the National Transportation and Safety Board. Welcome to you both. And Chairman Griffin, we will begin with you. Or Director Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon, Mr. Hall, for your kind statements. I only wish I were still young, but, oh well.
It's all a matter of relativity here.
Mr. Hall is my hero. He's still on the right side of the divot.
Yeah.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for the opportunity to appear here today to discuss aviation safety and the NAOMS project. When I was made aware last week that a NAOMS pilot survey data had been withheld under a Freedom of Information Act request initiated by the AP, I asked Dr. Lisa Porter, our AA for Aeronautics Research, to investigate the matter, and I hope to provide you with the information that will address the questions and concerns that have been raised by you and others in the past several days. Let me start by making 3 points clear up front. First, the survey results that we can legally release will be released, period. 2, the contractor and NASA maintain master copies of all NAOMS survey results, and we've instructed the NAOMS project management team and the contractor, Battelle, to retain all records related to the project. Battelle provided the same direction to its subcontractors. Also, sir, your staff has this data. 3, the NAOMS project had, from its inception, a planned and finite duration. It was not terminated early. It was, in fact, extended. And it was not terminated early to provide funds for the Moon-Mars program or anything else. Quite simply, the NAOMS project began in 1998 with the goal of developing methods to facilitate a data-driven approach to aviation system safety analysis. To accomplish this goal required the generation of data that are statistically meaningful and representative of the system. The NAOMS project team developed a survey methodology to acquire that data. The survey methodology development took about 2 years to complete. The actual data collection using that methodology began in April of '01 and ended in December of '04. During that time, the project team surveyed approximately 24,000 commercial airline pilots and 5,000 general aviation pilots. In early '05, it was determined that the number of survey results collected were sufficient to evaluate whether the NAOMS survey methodology indeed produced statistically meaningful and representative data. NASA's Aviation Safety and Security Program leadership then directed the NAOMS project to complete the assessment of its survey methodology and transfer it to industry and government decision makers, and provided the FY 2005 funding to do that. It's worth noting that the 2004 review of NASA's Aerospace Technology Enterprise by the National Academies concluded at that time that there was not a compelling argument for continued independent data collection in the NAOMS project. In fact, quoting from that report, the NAOMS project seems to be developing a methodology to establish trends in aviation safety performance that are already available through other sources within industry and government, end quote. In 2006, the Aviation Safety Program of NASA's Aeronautics Research Mission Directorate provided additional funding to complete the transition and to document the results. The transition of the survey methodology has now been successfully completed, but the documentation has taken longer to complete than anticipated. That will be completed by the end of this year.
Yeah.
Now, it has been widely reported that NAOMS funding was cut or prematurely ended. That is not the case. When the project originated in 1998, it was intended to continue until 2004, as indicated in project briefings that were provided to various government and industry audiences when it began. Copies of these briefings have been provided to committee staff for the record. As I previously mentioned, funding was extended through '06 to allow for transition of the methodology and final documentation, and the total amount that we've now spent on this effort has been $11.3 million. Now, with all that said, the overarching goal of trying to develop methodologies that enable data-driven safety analyses is one that we at NASA continue to embrace in the current aviation safety program, and we do so in close partnership with the FAA, industry, and academia. In order to significantly reduce the accident rate to meet the expected growth of the next generation air transportation system, NextGen, it's imperative to develop a robust safety information system that discovers safety precursors before accidents occur. Accomplishing this requires the ability to combine and analyze enormous amounts of data from varied sources to detect and act on new safety threats. To address this challenge, NASA and FAA are combining their separate and unique skills and resources under clearly defined roles and responsibilities. NASA is focused on the development of advanced analysis algorithms that can be implemented in a comprehensive system that the FAA can utilize to effectively analyze a wide variety of safety data. In order to ensure that the technology is effectively transitioned between the organizations, a program plan has been developed and is being executed. The initial response to this approach from the stakeholder community has been very positive. The FAA's Research, Engineering, and Development Advisory Committee, the REDAC Safety Subcommittee, recently reported, and recent means in October of '07, that it, quote, believes significant progress has been made over the past year, end quote, in defining the program and its execution. The safety subcommittee credited the leadership of both FAA and NASA for, quote, driving a well-integrated plan that will form the basis for proactive risk identification and assessment in the future, end quote. There has been a lot of speculation in the press regarding what the NAOMS survey might reveal about the safety of the National Aerospace System. Several briefings were given to other government agencies and industry organizations by members of the NAOMS project team, and some of those presentations included some analyses that were based upon extrapolating the survey results to estimate absolute numbers of events that would occur within a given time period. When this was done, for many of these events, the numbers were significantly higher than reported by other means, such as the Aviation Safety Reporting System, or ASRIS, that NASA manages by statute. However, no attempt was made to validate the NAOMS extrapolation methodology, and indeed, given the results for some cases, such as engine failure events that are highly public and carefully documented affairs, there may be reason to question the validity of the methodology itself. It is interesting to note here that in NASA's own safety reporting system, the NISRIS, 40% of the events which are reported are found later to be either overstated, unverifiable, or not significant enough to require follow-up. While some analysis of the survey results was presented to NASA, other government agencies, and other personnel, unfortunately, none of the research conducted in the NAOMS project, including the underlying survey methodology, was peer-reviewed, or has been peer-reviewed to date. Accordingly, any product of the NAOMS project, including the survey methodology, the resulting data, and any analysis of that data, should not be viewed or should not be considered at this stage as having been validated. So in plain speaking, when I said we can release whatever data we will release whatever data can be legally released, and we will do that, we do not certify that data. There has been considerable attention in the press to the supposed destruction of NAOMS data. In fact, Battelle, the prime contractor, maintains master copies of all survey data on CDs and other backup media in its Mountain View facility. NASA's Ames Research Facility at Moffett Field also has copies of this data. We had directed Battelle to recover or to ensure the secure destruction of any copies of survey results that might be held at locations outside Mountain View. This includes copies held by present or past Battelle NAOMS subcontractors. The purpose of that request was to ensure compliance with NASA's data security requirements as part of the contract closeout process, because the contract was scheduled to end in October of 2007. This request in no way jeopardized the security of the master copies, which remain secure at Battelle and at Ames. To ensure that no destruction of survey results occurs, however, including those held by subcontractors, after concerns about data destruction were raised by this committee, NASA directed the NAOMS project management team and Battelle to retain all records related to the NAOMS project, and Battelle provided the same direction to its subcontractors. We have provided all this information to the committee. Finally, let me focus on the Freedom of Information Act request. Under federal law, we at NASA are required to protect confidential commercial information that is voluntarily provided to the agency and would not customarily be released to the public. That is the law. In preparing our response to the AP Freedom of Information Act appeal, the characterization of the requested data by Ames researchers raised concerns that the data likely contained confidential commercial information. This characterization was the basis for withholding the data under Exemption 4. Now, considerable attention has been focused on one sentence in the final determination letter suggesting the data was being withheld because, quote, it could affect public confidence in and the commercial welfare of air carriers and general aviation companies, end quote. Now, I've already made it clear that I do not agree with the way this was written, and I regret any impression that NASA was or would in any way try to put commercial interests ahead of public safety. That was not and will never be the case. As for our plans for the data, I have directed that all NAOMS data not containing confidential commercial information or information that could compromise the anonymity of individual pilots be released as soon as possible. But at present, we're concerned that it might be possible that a knowledgeable person could identify a specific individual or reconstruct specific events back to a specific individual, and we must protect against that. And no proprietary commercial information could be compromised. We will receive a written report by Battelle by the end of this year that will include a description of the methodology, the approach, the field trials, etc. We will make this report available to any interested party. We intend to continue to emphasize the importance of peer review of all research results, whether conducted by NASA's researchers or our contractors funded by NASA. Peer review is critical to the achievement of technical excellence. Let me conclude by thanking you for this opportunity to appear before you to discuss the NAOMS issue and to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Griffin, for your candor once again. And Mr. Hall, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Hall, and distinguished members of this committee. I have provided extended testimony that I would like to submit for the record, pleases the Chairman.
No objection.
And it is, I think, significant that this meeting is being held on the 8th anniversary of the Egypt Air accident that occurred during my watch at the NTSB. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on aviation safety. Can NASA do more to protect the public? This is one of the issues that was addressed 10 years ago by the 1996 White House Commission on Aviation Safety and Security, which I had the privilege to serve on. The commission was prompted in large part by the tragic aviation accidents of that year, ValueJet and TWA 800. Before I begin, however, I would like to share with this committee that the most important thing I learned in my 7 years at the NTSB, and that is the culture of aviation safety has been built upon constant critical self-examination. Open and transparent information flow is the key to aviation safety. With openness in mind, the members of the 1996 Commission felt that we needed to get ahead of events in a rapidly changing environment to be able to improve the safety and security of aviation before, not after, another tragic accident occurred. Notable safety recommendations issued by the Commission included the establishment of standards for continuous safety improvement. A target rate of 80% was set for the reduction of fatal accidents. And we continued, which has considerable expertise and resources in the area of safety research, to expand its involvement in the promotion of aviation safety. In this last point, the extremely important safety research function is what brings us here today. Since the Commission met, we have seen a 65% reduction in fatal accidents. While this is certainly welcome news, there are dangerous trends in the aviation industry that stand to jeopardize that progress. These include air traffic controller and pilot staffing levels, the number of runway incursions, the dramatic increase we will see in general aviation, the development and implementation of next-gen, UAVs, and the explosion in passenger levels, which the chairman referred to, and which is estimated to reach 2.3 billion by the year 2027. More work indeed remains, which makes it all more frustrating that NASA withheld results obtained from what I first believed was an $8.5 million taxpayer-funded national survey of almost 24,000 pilots. This survey reportedly states that runway incursions, wildlife strikes, and near collisions occur at a rate at least twice as much as is commonly thought. As justification to its denial of a FOIA request, the NASA spokesman cited the potentially harmful effects on the commercial welfare of the air carriers and public confidence in aviation. Such action, I believe, runs counter to the safety culture mentality that the government and industry have worked to create over the past 10 years. As the Government Accounting Office has observed, transparency forms a fundamental basis for any safety program. If we don't know something is broken, we cannot fix it. It is difficult to overemphasize the importance of transparency and accountability in aviation. I know each one of you members fly probably weekly. I believe it is that transparency and accountability that is the single greatest reason you are so safe when you get on an airplane today. The history of transparency began with the Wright brothers, who assisted in the investigation of the first fatal aviation accident in 1908 and used the results to incorporate changes to their flying machine in order to save lives. This open process has resulted in numerous important advances in aviation. NTSB investigations and recommendations have led to the advent of the Traffic Alert and Collision Avoidance System, commonly known as TCAS, low-level wind shear alert systems, anti-collision systems, and ground proximity warning systems, to name but a few. To repeat, information flow is the key to safety. In its investigation into the two shuttle accidents in 1986 and 2003, NASA itself noted that a decline in transparency and accountability among management, and not simply a lack of adequate funding for safety, was a root cause of both disasters. Furthermore, because major aviation accidents are now such a rarity, our ability to identify risk and maintain or increase safety now depends primarily on our ability to fully analyze incidents and trends. A true safety culture requires transparency and constant diligence. Vigilance is required of all involved in the aviation industry, but its absence is probably most glaring when it is the fault of government, the servants of the American people. NASA needs to release this information and fulfill its responsibilities as envisioned by the 1996 White House Commission. To do otherwise, I believe, flies in the face of aviation history, responsible government, and common sense. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you, Mr. Hall. At this point, we will open up for our first round of questions, and the chair recognizes himself. Let me first state that I think by any measure you might take, particularly if you want to say the number of miles flown, that the United States has the safest air traffic transportation system in the world. I fly, as Mr. Hall says, almost every week, often with my wife and my daughter. I don't intend to change those flight plans in any way. So our discussion today is not safety and non-safety. It is safety and more safety. And so we should make that very clear. And let me also say that, 24,000 commercial pilots and 5,000 private pilots, that to me sounds like an unprecedented amount for a survey. And so that is an enormous amount of data that I think should be made available. And although I recognize NASA's interest in a particular methodology, I think that oftentimes some of the most important discoveries in America have been those offshoots of information. So I would ask you, Director Griffin, now that your lawyers have for over a year had this request on the Freedom of Information, why can't this material be released today?
When we look at the material, despite the certifications that I know you've heard from the contractor involved, the data, in fact, today could not, in its fullness, be legally released.
And why is that? Because
it does contain specific comments that identify certain airlines. It contains, it notes accidents and incidents or occurrences that cite specific time frames, specific airports, specific makes and models of airplanes. If I look at that data, I can reconstruct for you.
Mr. Griffin,
so we are going to delete those fields. We are asking our contractor to delete those fields and to render data back to us which is not identifiable, as they were originally required to do.
You only have 5 minutes, so
I'm sorry.
We've asked your lawyers to cite that. You were nice enough to provide the information to us. We couldn't find it. We've asked your lawyers to point us in that direction, to that information. They couldn't do it. Have you seen this specific information?
I have seen examples of specific information which would not be in this report, which would not be releasable.
Okay. Well, it would have been helpful if your lawyers had shown us, because we specifically asked that. But let me also, I want to put up a slide, if I could, please, from your contractor. Apparently, there is a program that is supposed to scrub it, and within NASA's own information, it says, participant confidentiality is assured. So, apparently you have already done this.
Well, no, that information is not, as it stands, correct.
Even though it has the NASA logo on it?
I'm sorry, it's not correct. Okay, it is possible to look at this data, and if one knows anything about aviation, in some cases to go back and identify the participants, and that can't be allowed.
So NASA was premature in certifying its confidentiality?
Correct.
All right. Well, let me ask you this: are you familiar with the Aviation Safety Reporting System?
Very much so.
Okay. I want to read to you one section of that that is from March of 2004. And this is up on the internet. This is available for everybody. After two previous, and I'm quoting, after two previous red-eyes, this being the third red-eye in a row, the last 45 minutes of flight, I fell asleep, and so did the first officer. Missed all calls from the air traffic control. That was the quote. This is a report made by an aircraft crew member who slept through their descent clearance 60 miles southeast of Denver. Once they're awakened by the frantic calls from the air traffic control, they executed a successful landing. Now, this is just one of thousands of the reports that identify the airport, sometime the approximate time, aircraft, runways numbers. This material is public.
That's true.
So why should your survey not be public? Is it going to go into more? I mean, have they not done what they said they were going to do and scrubbed it to at least to this extent?
When we look at the data, we do not at this point believe the data has been scrubbed sufficiently to assure confidentiality of the participants and to protect confidential commercial information according to the standard to which we're held. As soon as we can do that, we will release the data. Now,
are you going to have a standard higher than this ASRS?
I wouldn't say so.
Okay. So the information that I just read to you, that's already public, you would not say that has to be scrubbed. There have to be greater. I don't know how. A greater level of detail to be scrubbed.
I don't know that I would characterize it as a greater or lesser level of detail, but we do need to remove specific references to airlines, specific references to incidents and time frames, such that the pilot identity could be reconstructed. We think that that would be a relatively straightforward process to delete certain of the fields which convey that information, and we believe the initial release of the data could occur by the end of this year.
And so you're going to do it by fields, so it will be by a computer program.
Right. Certain of the fields will be.
Well, it seems like that's what's already been done here, and if it's a computer program, why can't you do it today, tomorrow?
I think you...
Before the end of the year.
I think you may be, when you look at that view graph, there may be some confusion between anonymizing the data to satisfy Privacy Act considerations and rendering the data such that no one knowledgeable in the field of aviation could go back and reconstruct it.
Well, isn't that the same thing, too? With Freedom of Information, if the AP asked for this on Freedom of Information, then wouldn't you have assumed it would be made public record? And so it's the same thing, the same level of caution? And you folks had a year to do this already.
I don't think we've had a year since the original submission, since the submission of the FOIA request. In any case, I'm not defending. I stated for the record, and I will state for the record again, that I believe the FOIA determination that we should not release the data was incorrect. Okay, we will release the data. As we set out to look at the data to verify whether we could release it or not, we found that the data had not, in fact, been correctly scrubbed to remove identifying data. And if it had been, I would have released it on the spot. But it has not, and so until and unless I can verify that it has been correctly scrubbed, it will not be released.
I don't want to infringe on my time. You have never given me a reason not to trust your statement anyway. Let me just tell you that we've asked your lawyers specifically to provide us that information, to point someplace. We have not been, you've given us data.
Yes, sir.
So all you got to do is say, look here, look there. And so it would give me a greater level of confidence if your folks could tell us where, could give us one example, or, then we could feel more comfortable that you need this additional time.
Yes, sir. Let me then take that request for the record, and we will provide you with at least a couple of examples where specific identifying information is included that would allow pilot participant identities to be compromised. They do exist, and we will provide those for you.
And I would hope they would be to a greater clarity than what's already a public record on the ASRS.
They are extraordinarily clear.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. And I now recognize Mr. Hall.
Dr. Griffin, I get right down to the basis of this, and we're talking about confidentiality at this time. And you can give me a yes or no answer on this, I think. When pilots were surveyed, were they led to believe that their responses would be confidential?
They were promised confidentiality, yes.
So if their responses were released, do you think it would have had a chilling effect on their future participation in FAA or NASA surveys? And would airline safety ultimately be hurt by disclosing this data if fewer pilots contributed to other surveys and reporting systems? Or let me go on be a little more personal with that. As a pilot yourself, with many years of flying experience, would this data give you pause as to whether it's really anonymous, or would it worry you that your input could be traced back to you? And would that have a chilling effect on you?
Well, in its present form, some of the examples can be traced back to pilots and some name individual airlines. That can't be allowed. If the data is properly rendered untraceable, then I think it must be released and should be released and will be released, as I've stated several times. So if it were properly anonymized, I have no concern.
And they do that by cross-referencing flight routes, times, and carriers?
We need to delete the fields that contain those informations. So that will be done. Now, the major concern I would have over this data at this point is that somebody might put too much credence in it. It is simply not credible to believe that the aviation community is experiencing nearly 4 times the number of engine failures that are being documented by the FAA. That is not credible to believe. If it's true, it is going to require some very strong justification, and we will pursue that. The community will pursue that, but it is not credible at this point. So I would not want the flying public to believe the data in the form that it appears today.
Mr. Hall, wake up.
Yes, sir.
NASA surveys is but one source of data that can be used to measure safety trends in the national airspace system. What other sources can be used to monitor system safety, and how useful are they?
Well, the ASRS system, which NASA has used for years, is, of course, I think, very useful in terms of it's a voluntary program. It's a program that's why I'm a little confused in regard to some of the comments from the administrator. NASA's run this program for the federal government for a number of years, so they're familiar with how to put a program together and maintain confidentiality. There are other programs that are run by FAA, and of course NTSB has gotten into trying to look at as many incidents as possible in providing information. But aviation safety benefits from having, as I mentioned in my statement, sir, a very open system, and a system where there's a whole lot of information, and that information is constantly in the public for analysis and review.
Dr. Griffin, you state that NASA will release the survey data so long as it doesn't compromise the anonymity of the pilots, keep them anonymous. And does that not contain confidential commercial information?
Well, by the time we release it, it will not contain confidential commercial information. Some of the data that we have today does so, and we are not legally allowed to do that by statute. There have been a number of comparisons made to the Aviation System Reporting System, the ASRIS, which NASA does manage by statute, and this survey. One of the primary differences between ASRS and this survey was that ASRS is managed by aviation specialists. When reports are made, the aviation specialists can contact the submitter of the report and ask follow-up questions. They are knowledgeable about aviation safety. This survey was conducted by telephone polling surveyors who have no knowledge or had no knowledge at all as to aviation or aviation safety. They had no domain expertise, and it is precisely that which has led to some of the problems that we are here discussing today.
I think my time's up, Mr. Chairman. I think I'll yield back if I have it.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Let me once again state that this is not a matter of a hearing between a safe system and an unsafe system. It is a matter of a very safe system that we want to, make continuing the model for the entire world. And now we'll recognize Mr. Costello, the chairman of the Aviation Subcommittee of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for calling this hearing today, as well as the chairman of the subcommittee, Chairman Miller. Welcome, Dr. Griffin, Mr. Hall. Mr. Hall, it's good to see you in the Science Committee room for a change as opposed to the T&I room. But we can go through a whole long list of questions. Let's cut to the chase and get down to why we're here. We talk about scrubbing the report in order for it to be released without breaking anyone's confidence or a commitment. You're saying that you can release the information possibly by the end of the year, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
How long will it take? I mean, if it's a priority in the agency, and I would hope that you would acknowledge that the agency made a huge mistake in how they responded to the AP and to the media. Your spokesperson did in fact, unless you are refuting this, did in fact say to the news media that if we release the data, it could have an adverse effect on the industry. Is that correct, Dr. Griffin?
We did say that, and as I've now said several times, that was the wrong thing to have said. I apologize that anyone in my agency did say that.
So you know that it was a mistake to say that. You know that it has created a lot of controversy. You know that people in the aviation industry and the traveling public, because I have heard from my constituents, and I've heard from complete strangers to me at airports as I am flying, what's going on with this report and why won't you release it to the public? If it is a priority to us, shouldn't it be a priority to your agency to scrub this and get it out to the public immediately?
It is a priority. I have a shuttle mission in the air right now, and I have spent little else this past week except to work on this issue.
I would hope that there are other people in the agency that you could assign this to, as opposed to you handling this personally.
Well, we have had quite a number of people working on it. We do consider it to be a priority, and we consider it to be an important one. Now, the fact that people at NASA misspoke concerning the reasons behind the denial of the FOIA request does not mean that we can compromise our statutory requirements.
And no one is asking you
FOIA.
to compromise a statutory requirement.
Right.
What we are saying is, get this done and get it out to the public. And my question to you is, do you have people today and this evening and around the clock working on this project to scrub it, to get it out to the public?
The people who have to work on this project to scrub the data and get it out to the public are at Battelle Institute. They have been directed to do that. I hope that they are doing that with all deliberate speed, and we will be verifying that. When Battelle has finished scrubbing it, the quality of the scrub must be judged by government officials, who will then do that as quickly as possible, and we will get it out to you.
So have you directed Battelle to work on this around the clock? Have you given them a deadline?
I have not directed them to work on it around the clock. We have directed them to work on it.
Isn't it reasonable for us to expect for you to give them a deadline? They are working for you.
They are, and we have asked them to complete it by the end of the year. That is what we are asking. That's 2 months away.
And if you told them June of '08, they'd complete it in June of '08. Isn't that correct?
You're asking for more detail than I have. It's a significant amount of data processing. We will do it as soon as we can, and we are trying for the end of the year.
Dr. Griffin, you've acknowledged that the agency misspoke. They created this uproar with the American people and with the Congress and with everyone in this room. It's your responsibility to clean this up. If I were in your shoes, I would be directing Battelle to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to get this thing cleaned up so it can be released to the public. Last and final question that I have, the person who misspoke representing the agency, have you identified who that is?
Yes, sir.
Have you taken any disciplinary action against that person?
It's not a matter of discipline. People make mistakes. This was a mistake.
My question, we all understand it was a mistake. Has there been any disciplinary action taken?
No.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Wisconsin, former chairman of the Aviation Subcommittee on this committee, as well as the full committee, Mr. Sensenbrenner is recognized.
Thank you very much, Dr. Griffin. First of all, I think we all want to see what the results of the survey are. Secondly, I think we all agree that certain things have to be kept confidential. That was what was represented to the people who were asked to respond to the survey, and they responded candidly based upon the representation of confidentiality. I guess what I'd like to know is the survey was finished in 2005, and we're almost at the end of 2007. That's 2.5 years, more or less, between the time the survey was finished. Why is there this gap in time? Who dropped the ball?
We at NASA did not manage this project to its conclusion well. We did not. Because of that, I have instituted a look at other projects that we are doing in various classes of research at NASA to make sure that we're not doing the same thing elsewhere.
Which NASA Center of, quote, excellence, unquote, supervised Battelle in this survey?
This particular project was supervised out of the Ames Research Center.
Okay. Have you found out why the Ames Research Center didn't follow up and have a timely report?
I have not.
Will you do it and let us know?
I will take that for the record. We will find out what their rationale was for taking so long to allow this report to be generated, and we will answer back to you.
Okay, well, let me say that this appears to be a mess of NASA's own causing. and you are the agency head, and I would hope that we don't hear from you again on another mess of NASA's own causing. I'd point out that in about 2.5 years, we're going to have a census in this country. And one of the things the Census Bureau represents to every American or everybody who is in this country is that their responses will be confidential. And that's in order to get a candid response on not only how many people are here, but the housing questions and the other things that are asked on the census form. Any government agency that gets itself caught in a pickle like NASA is in is going to reduce the confidence of the American public that responses that are supposed to be kept confidential will indeed be kept confidential. Sir, you dug yourself into a hole. I can't say that you're not digging yourself deeper into the hole from what I've heard at this hearing, but I think it's important more than just for your agency, but the government as a whole, that you start working yourself out of that hole. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Colorado, the chairman of the Space and Aeronautics Subcommittee, Mr. Udall, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Dr. Griffin. I'd like to start by echoing what Chairman Gordon said today. We're all disappointed we've had to convene the hearing, but the fact that NASA refused to release the taxpayer-funded aviation safety survey and the rationale that NASA gave for refusing to release this information is unacceptable, and it obviously required congressional scrutiny. I think we all agree the safety of the public has to be our first priority, especially with more and more Americans flying every year. I'm glad that you've now agreed to release at least some of the survey data publicly so that it can be used to help maintain and hopefully improve the safety of the nation's airways. But I feel strongly that all of the data should be made publicly available as soon as possible. I've also have some concerns about why the study was ended. Several witnesses here today have affirmed the value of a comprehensive ongoing survey and analysis approach to aviation safety trend analysis and accident precursor identification, which is the approach exemplified by the NAOMS project. I think there appears that we would all agree to be a great deal of merit to the NAOMS approach, and we need to assess whether NASA and the FAA should reinstitute the project. Doctor, if I could just leave aside for a moment the issue of peer review of survey methodologies, which our second panel will be addressing, I have to say that I'm troubled by your testimony on the NAOMS project. At one point in the testimony, you state that the project was not shut down prematurely and that the transition of the survey methodology to industry government decision makers was successfully completed. However, later in your testimony, you say that any product of the NAOMS project, including the survey methodology, should not be viewed or considered at this stage as having been validated. Basically, at least to this member, you're saying that NASA didn't complete a critically important R&D task, the validation of the survey methodology, before it transitioned NAOMS out of NASA. Later, Captain McVenes will testify that the aviation community had plans to work with NASA to help determine if the survey data were reliable, but funding for NAOMS ran out, and that is when the ALPA stepped in to help keep the project alive. This doesn't appear to be the normal way R&D programs should be run, and I think that the Space and Aeronautics Subcommittee will need to take a closer look at NASA's aeronautics programs and its aviation safety programs in particular in the coming months. But in the spirit of openness and dialogue here, I'd see if you'd care to respond to those comments.
Well, we certainly agree, could not agree more, that aviation safety information leading to trending analysis and accident factor identification before the fact is crucial. We are working on exactly those things in concert with the FAA, again, in a program that has been reviewed by the FAA's own safety subcommittee, in which we have submitted for review to the National Academies. So we agree with that. NASA, however, is not the entity responsible or even allowed to take on the job of operational aviation safety. We do research. And we are doing that, and we expect to continue to do it because we do believe it's important. Now, as I said in my testimony earlier, the National Academy in its 2004 review specifically stated that they did not see a reason for the NAOMS project to continue. We agree. We have transitioned our other projects of that type to a joint FAA-NASA arrangement that I think is working well. And when NAOMS was, as it was, scheduled to end in 2004, with follow-up reporting to be done in 2005, we allowed that to occur as had been planned. So I don't think there's any evil intent here. There was no intent to abrogate our responsibilities. In fact, our intent was to execute them as best we could with our FAA partner. What was not done here was to bring the project to a timely conclusion, to assess the data, to issue a report, to publish that report in peer-reviewed journals, and to release the data to the public in a timely way, properly anonymized. That was not done, and we're going to have to do it.
Spirit in which I offer my remarks are as follows. I think this situation, of course, is one that we have great concern about on the committee, but I think we should take advantage of the clear opportunity here to make our system safer and to take this data, 24,000 responses, that's very, very significant, and apply it and use it in a way that has some utility in the coming months and the coming years. I see my time's expired. Thank you for being here today again.
Dr. Ehlers, thanks for your being prompt today. I'm sorry that I overlooked that earlier, and Dr. Ehlers of Michigan is recognized for 5 minutes.
Oh, that's quite all right. I'm used to being overlooked. I hope you all feel sorry for me. Actually, I'm going to take a somewhat different tack and also do some criticism, but not of you, Dr. Griffin. Your situation reminds me very much of a quote from Harry Truman when he left the presidency. And his comment was, "This job was not so great. I spent all of my time trying to persuade people to do things they should have had sense enough to do in the first place." Your situation reminds me a bit of that. And I agree with the comment made that you have more important things to do than to deal with this particular problem, and it's unfortunate that it developed and entwined you in it. But as the son of a preacher, I have to give a little sermon here, and I've been warned never to insult the media, but I'm going to anyway, because it has always puzzled me why the media are so obsessed with aviation safety when it is the safest mode of transportation in this country. I remember some years ago when I was new in the Congress, but there's a low-cost airline had an airplane crash in the Everglades because some attendant or some mechanic had loaded some oxygen units on the plane which shouldn't have been there. Day after day, month after month, this was headlines in the newspapers, and I pointed out repeatedly that the same day that airplane crashed, more people were killed in automobile accidents in this country than were killed in that airplane. Every day after that, more people were killed on the highways than were killed in that plane crash. Yet headlines day after day. The safety is better than any other mode of transportation. We should recognize that and participate in it. I don't fault you whatsoever for things that may have gone wrong in this. You were caught in an unfortunate situation in responding to a FOIA request, which is a no-no. But nevertheless, I think your motives here were very good. I would also point out that if people are so concerned about safety, there's an immediate problem you can tackle with traffic accidents, and that is drunk drivers. We have had a number of drunk drivers kill individuals while we are sitting here in this session, more than were killed by airplanes. And it goes on year after year. In fact, so far, or in any given year, more individuals are killed by drunk drivers than were killed among our troops in the entire Iraq War up to this date. That's every year that happens. and yet we spend all this time on aviation safety. I'm not opposed to making airplanes as safe as they should be. I'm a would-be pilot myself, and I certainly want a safe airplane and safe air traffic control system. But let's get over this obsession, and let's recognize that our goal is to improve what is already very good and not get obsessed about little incidents that occur when we have much bigger problems to tackle in the aviation sector. So I beg your apology for the sermon, Mr. Chairman, but I just have to say these things once in a while. Let's get stuff in perspective. And the world is not going to rise or fall, and the aviation industry is not going to rise or fall on the results of this survey. I doubt if we'll learn much different than we've learned from the previous surveys. It's all good. Let's all do it, but let's not overstate it. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Naylors. I hope you feel better. The gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Melanson, is recognized for 5 minutes. Melanson passes, and let me see. Mr. Mitchell from Arizona, also on the Transportation Committee, is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This is for Dr. Griffin. You know, airline business in my particular district is a very, very serious business. One of the nation's largest airlines is located in Tempe, and Phoenix Sky Harbor is the 8th largest or busiest airport in the country. We depend on aviation, and we depend upon the federal government to keep our skies safe. And I was stunned, as most people were, and I think this is why we were here, because of the statement that came out that you've heard many times before. The effect of the reason the report was not released is because of the effect that it might have on the public confidence and so on. Now you're telling us that you don't agree with that statement that was made last week. But Dr. Griffin, you are the administrator of NASA. How could this statement be released without first being reviewed and agreed upon as NASA's stance on this particular issue?
The delegated FOIA official released the response in the form of a letter and included a statement that I believe to have been mistaken. I try to review everything that I believe will be significant before it goes out, but I don't have enough hours in a day to review every single thing that goes out of NASA, and sometimes mistakes are made. This was one, and when that occurs, as the agency head, I pay the price for it.
But you have the time now to come and mea culpa.
Obviously, I have had to make the time because we did make a mistake, and the mistake rests on my shoulders, and I apologize for it, and I have before, and I will again. The language that was used was inappropriate. We will not repeat it. We will correct the error. We will de-identify the data, and we will release it.
Well, besides this particular statement, I would hope that you would have a better review of what comes out of your office, because you may be back here again, the way things seem, doing the same thing you're doing now. You know, you said that NASA is interested in getting this safety information out. And my question is, why has NASA refused to produce it to the Associated Press for a year? Now, my understanding is the study started in April of 2001, ended in December 2004. Why does it take a hearing in Congress and public pressure for a hearing to get the public to get this information made public?
As I said earlier, the only way that I can answer that question is to admit, as I have, that we did not manage that project well. We did not bring it to a timely conclusion. We did not publish the data and the report's conclusions in an appropriate way, and we will fix it, and we will try not to do it again.
The next part of this question is, you stated that this was not conducted, this survey, under proper standards of NASA. So it seems like there's been a lot of mistakes here. And this is one of them. You say it wasn't under NASA's normal review. Why would NASA invest over $11 million in a project like this if it didn't follow NASA standards?
We did not manage the project well. We did not supervise our contractor appropriately. We made a mistake.
You know, all of this reflects on NASA's credibility.
Yes, sir, I do.
I yield back.
I deeply regret the situation, and I will look in. We are now looking to make sure that this does not occur again.
Thank you. We're going to be having votes in about 20 minutes, so I want everybody to have their say. I'll be stricter than usual on the 5 minutes, and if you want to be briefer than usual, then that would be good too. So Mr. Bonner from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I could probably spend the next 5 minutes trying to think of some creative way to ask the same question that has been asked repeatedly to get a different answer. But instead, if I might, I would like to take advantage of this opportunity that we don't often have to ask Dr. Griffin how the shuttle mission is going, because I think a lot of people are interested. We've followed that with great interest over the years, and I think it'd be great to hear from you on how it's going at this point.
It's going extremely well. We have an unfortunate rip in one of the solar arrays, not a huge rip, but a rip, and that's important to repair before the crew returns, and so we're going to extend the mission an extra couple of days to do that. But other than that, it's going extremely well.
Do you feel personally responsible for that solar rip?
You know, I'm an ex-program manager, and my belief is if lightning strikes your payload, it's your fault. So yes, I feel responsible for that rip, and for repairing it, and we're going to fix it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bonner. And the chairman of our Oversight Committee, Mr. Miller, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Griffin, good afternoon. The next panel will include Dr. Robert Dodd, who was the principal investigator for the NAOMS project. Have you discussed your testimony and his with Dr. Dodd at all? Have you reviewed his testimony?
No, I've not.
Okay.
I've not met your next two witnesses.
His prepared testimony says that the NAOMS team made an extraordinary effort to clean and validate the data collected through the survey. The resulting data is of good quality and ready for meaningful analysis. You disagree with Dr. Dodd?
I do disagree with that statement.
Okay.
The self-assertion by the purveyors of the data that the data is okay does not make it okay.
Okay. Well, that was another. I understand a concern for methodology, but there does seem to be an extraordinary concern for methodology. Dr. Dodd's statement of the purpose of NAOMS was help identify risks that could result in losses, evaluate the impact of new technology, provide insights into how well safety enhancements are working out. In other words, provide results based upon which we could act. And your testimony is that the overarching goal of developing methods to facilitate a data-driven approach to aviation system safety analysis. That in early 2005, you determined that the amount of data collected was sufficient to evaluate whether NAOMS survey methodology was statistically useful. There were 29,000 survey results. I would hope that would be enough. And representative, and then you have said in your testimony that it was not prematurely ended. It sounds from your testimony like the purpose of the project was to develop a methodology. It seems like $11.3 million is a lot for methodology. That ought to buy you a lot of methodology. Was it your purpose to do the things that Dr. Dodd said, which is have information that you can use?
Well, from NASA's perspective, the purpose was to develop and validate methodologies and then to transition the work to the agencies with operational responsibility.
Okay, and when did that transfer happen?
The transfer of methodology and data to the Airline Pilots Association, which had expressed some interest in a web-based version of the survey, occurred in 2005 and 2006. NASA has briefed the results of the study to the FAA, among other government agencies.
So it has been analyzed to that extent.
It has been analyzed to that extent, and that analysis that you refer of that has been done to that extent revealed substantial concerns. For example, if you extrapolate the rate of certain things revealed by the survey, you get an uncredible answer. For example, pilots were asked how often they had to land an airplane at an unscheduled airport in order to deal with an unruly passenger. We accumulated those statistics. If those statistics are extrapolated forward, it yields a result that 4 times a day a transport aircraft is landing because the crew has to deal with an unruly passenger. Now, I recall since 9/11 that has happened maybe 2 or 3 times.
Okay.
If we had people landing 4 times per day to deal with an unruly passenger, it would be on the nightly news every night.
Right.
That's not happening. So it causes us to suspect the quality of this data.
All right, Dr. Griffin, I understand that the Office of Management and Budget has an office of experts, survey experts. Survey methodology is not unusual. It is widely used in the federal government. It's widely used in social sciences. It's widely used. Of survey experts and statisticians who review the methodology of all surveys used by the federal government. Was this survey reviewed by that office in OMB?
I don't know. I was not at NASA when that work was done, and so I don't know if it was reviewed by the OMB at that time or not.
All right. You cite as still correct the refusal to provide the information under FOIA as revealing confidential commercial information. My understanding of that exception is that is to protect the confidentiality of information provided by a business entity that might be confidential for business reasons, market information, financial information, etc. It's hard to see how this survey data provided by pilots would meet that exception. What kinds of confidential commercial information did this survey produce?
Well, the exemption that you refer to is of course correct, as you state, but it is not the only one. In the case where information is voluntarily provided, and when that information would not be customarily provided to the public, then we also have an obligation to protect that information.
Gentleman, time has expired. Mr. Inglis is recognized.
Pass, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman, Mr. Thank you. And is there Mr. Lipinski?
I'm going to leave this stuff.
Okay, excuse me. Mr. Chandler is next, then Mr. Lipinski, and
Dr. Griffin, I've been listening to the testimony, and I understand that sounds to me like you may believe you all made a mistake.
I have admitted it several times.
I think that has come out in this hearing. And I understand that has to do with the handling of the FOIA request.
Yes, sir.
But I also it just came across my mind that maybe you believe that this entire process has been mishandled and you've made a mistake in the entire survey process and not overseeing what is a pretty enormous project. Is that the case as well?
I have, this is not an enormous project by NASA's standards.
But in this particular instance, it's a pretty important project.
But when we spend $11 million of the taxpayers' money, it should be done well. And I have stated, I regret to state it, but I have stated that by my standards, we did not manage this project well. We did not manage our contractor well.
And you're also saying that at the end of all of this, and when this data is in fact released, there's going to be reason to not have much confidence in the ultimate data. Is that correct?
I have been a pilot for decades. Anyone who knows anything about aviation is going to look at this data and have a lot of questions about it because it is on its face. On its face, when you look at it, you can extract from it conclusions which are not credible.
Well, what I'm hearing you say is we've just thrown $11 million down a rat hole.
I hope that's not the case, and I believe that we should be able to get much that is useful from this data, but there will be cause to question it by knowledgeable aviation experts.
Would my friend yield to Mr. Lipinski so we could try to finish this panel?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
There we go. I'll try to make this quick, though. This is very important. Airline safety is critical. I have airport in my district, Midway Airport, O'Hare Airport, very close proximity. I just want to zero in, Dr. Griffin, I have a lot of respect for you. Today you're on the hot seat, deservedly so, though, with this project. You talk about this project was not managed well. To me, I look at it and see the project started 6 years, $11 million, no results. It could mean one of two things, either complete incompetence, that this project had so many problems with it that you couldn't get anything good out of it, or, you know, I could use the word cover-up. I'll say, but there was some reason that this was stopped. There was something that, for some reason, someone did not want to show up. When this stopped, were there plans for anyone else to be surveyed after you did the airline pilots? Was there anyone else after that?
No, there was not. This project,
was at the end?
in the original material, which has been submitted to this committee, documenting this project, it was intended that the project be ended in 2004. We have, for purposes of transition and simply because things have gone slower than they should have, this project has continued unto the present day. But there has been no cover-up. There is no desire to conceal anything.
Okay, I'm very...
Mr. Pinsky, would you mind yielding to
Yes,
Ms.
I will yield.
for her concluding statement?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just be very brief or as quick as I possibly can. Mr. Griffin, I represent the California area, and we've had several reported incidences within the LAX airport, and I also represent the Long Beach airport. I have the following questions, and if you can't answer them within the time we have provided, you can provide them to this committee. Number one, who and when decided that there would be a destruction of data requested? In your statement, you say that that didn't happen, and so my question to you would be, if it didn't happen, then why was it requested that the subcontractor, why were they directed to recover data? It just doesn't make sense. If they weren't required to destruct it, then they shouldn't now be required to recover it.
Mr. Gentlelady, why don't you go ahead and read your questions, and then Dr. Griffin can respond for the record, if that's okay.
We'll take them for the record.
The second thing is, if the project was initiated in 1998, started collection in April of 2001, and started that in 2004, I find it really hard to understand, number one, why in 7-8 years you failed to complete a peer review, why we now suddenly question the methodology. I come from the private sector. I don't know of anyone who manages a project that you don't look at the data, how the data is being collected, how is it being presented, how are you going to use it, what should be included, what should not be included, that we finally wake up 8 years later. I don't know of a system of how we do this and we operate it. And then finally, I would say really the continued avoidance of requests is just unprofessional. I'm a new member here, but I'll tell you what I call it. I don't call it a mistake. I call it negligence, and I really think that NASA is liable. And if something happens, this is a very serious issue, and I really resent that we're here today even having this discussion. This is something that could have been dealt with, I believe, if you really wanted it to. And for me to say 2 months is completely unacceptable. These are computer programs. You either make it a priority or you don't, and it seems to me today it's not a priority to you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Hall.
could I make an inquiry of
Certainly.
Mike, would you mind staying around during the second panel where we might respond to anything else that might happen? You know, something may come up as to whether or not we've handled immigration well. You know, the whole Congress might get indicted on that. We may have some questions of why we don't have an appropriations bill for the first time in history. A lot of us haven't handled things well, and you said that you haven't. You've acknowledged it. Please stay around, if you would, for this next, to where we can inquire of you for some answers if we need them. Would you?
Of course, yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Mr. Hall, Tennessee, thank you for being here. Dr. Griffin, you're a good administrator of NASA. The buck does stop with you. It's unfortunate you have to spend this time. I hope the message goes out to those folks that work for you that they should not put you in this position in the future. We will take a recess to go vote and then come back for our second panel shortly.
Trailers.
I apologize.
Well, we got ourselves in trouble.
I have been informed that Mr. Hall is on his way, and we are going to assume that it is his pleasure that we do not hold you up any more than necessary, so we will go ahead and proceed. We don't have control over when votes occur. Sorry to hold you up. This is an important hearing, and we do want to proceed. So at this time, I will introduce our second panel of witnesses. Mr. Robert S. Dodd is the safety consultant and president of Dodd and Associates, LLC. Next, Dr. John Krosnick is the Frederic O. Glover Professor in Humanities and Social Science at Stanford University. And our last witness on this second panel is Captain Terry McVenes, who is the Executive Air Safety Chairman of the Airline Pilots Association. Welcome to all of you. As you know, we hope that you will submit your full testimony and summarize it in 5 minutes, if that's possible. If not, we do not want to interfere with a good hearing today. And so, Mr. Dodd, the microphone is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Dr. Robert Dodd, and I appreciate the opportunity to address the committee on the NAOMS project. For 7 years, I served as the principal investigator for NAOMS. I consider myself extremely fortunate to have been involved with NAOMS. This was a unique project based on thorough preparation and outstanding science. NASA managers provided the research team with the support and leadership needed to design and conduct an exceptional project. The research team itself was composed of an extremely well-qualified and knowledgeable group of scientists whose commitment to the project was unparalleled. Finally, and most importantly, I must acknowledge the commitment and effort of the hundreds of professional and general aviation pilots who helped design the survey, and the 29,000 pilots who donated over 14,000 hours of their time to tell us about their safety experiences in an effort to improve the safety of the nation's air transportation system. When I learned that NASA had decided the data collected by NAOMS would not be released to the public, I was disappointed and perplexed. I've seen many reasons cited for why NASA decided these data should not be released. The press reported that NASA was concerned that the data might frighten airline passengers, and this would have a negative effect on the well-being of the airlines. Other aviation organizations claim that the NAOMS data were soft data and voluntarily submitted. The implication was that the NAOMS data were somehow of limited or no value because they originated with pilots who were voluntarily responding to a survey. Finally, there are press reports that stated NAOMS data were not needed because current FAA oversight systems provided an adequate picture of the safety performance of the aviation system. I don't agree with these perspectives. I believe the American public understands and accepts that travel by commercial airlines in the United States is the safest mode of travel in the world. Major air carrier crashes are thankfully rare events. I don't believe, based on my experience, that the NAOMS data contained any information that would increase a passenger's fear of flying. NAOMS data, which were collected to help ensure that the U.S. airline safety remains best in the world, should be released so it can be used for its intended purpose. I would like to encourage the committee to consider why a program like NAOMS is currently not operating. In most other aspects of public health and safety, U.S. government and industry organizations routinely use surveys to identify and understand risk. Many of these programs have been in existence for years and are central to effective oversight and evaluations of the nation's safety and health programs. A program like NAOMS can help identify risk by obtaining information from those who should know, the people operating the system. It can also help evaluate the safety impact of new technologies as they are introduced. This is an important consideration in light of all the changes occurring in the aviation system on a daily basis, and especially when we consider the new technologies such as the air traffic control overhaul, which is going to be coming shortly. Finally, a NAOMS-like program can provide quick insight into how well safety enhancements and improvements are working, a capability difficult to duplicate with today's aviation safety oversight systems. In closing, I believe that NAOMS should be restarted and operated by an independent and unbiased organization. Such a program should receive funding directly from Congress to ensure its budget remains adequate to fulfill its mission. I appreciate the opportunity to comment on this important program.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dodd. And our next witness, please proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm a professor at Stanford University with expertise in psychology and political science, and I've devoted most of my career to the study and use of survey methodology. I've conducted more than 100 surveys and have conducted research to identify best practices in the design of surveys. I've written more than 350 research papers and received 65 grants and contracts to support my research, mostly from the federal government. I've written a textbook in this area, and as an expert on survey methods, I've advised many federal agencies on how to conduct their surveys, including the GAO, the IRS, the CIA, the NIH, NOAA, EPA, the Census Bureau, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, CDC, and others. I'm here to thank and congratulate NASA and to offer my praise to them for a job well done to the highest standards of excellence so far in their work on NAOMS. There are many data collection systems in place to track air safety problems, and NAOMS is a terrific addition to this array. In my opinion, NAOMS has been a great success, and NASA deserves to be very proud of this success and deserves the thanks of this Congress and of all Americans. As you know, NAOMS was designed to measure the frequency of the precursors of aviation accidents through statistically reliable scientific surveys of pilots. You might imagine that information on these events can be collected reliably by machines, by black boxes on aircraft, by computers in the air traffic control system, and by video cameras watching airport operations. But imagine the gigantic volume of information that would be collected by such systems in just one day. And imagine trying to wade through that mountain of information to try to identify safety compromising events. And that mountain would not even include the many experiences and events that occur during interactions between people without a machine record. This is why NAOMS was conceived as it was, to use the eyes and ears of the people actually operating the aviation system to track what they experience and convey the resulting information to policymakers. For decades, the federal government has sponsored many long-standing and recurring survey projects to collect information used to promote public welfare. The unemployment rate is measured through surveys, the inflation rate is measured through surveys, and federal agencies regularly conduct surveys to measure much, much more. Surveys are a mainstay of the federal government and have been shown to provide valuable scientific measurements of the experiences of our nation's huge population quickly, accurately, and inexpensively as compared to other ways to learn the same information. Lauren Rosenthal's vision of NAOMS is shown on this slide, which was presented by NASA in many public meetings. The NAOMS project was to involve the design and implementation of surveys not only of pilots, but also of air traffic controllers, flight attendants, and mechanics every week of every year to measure how many of various specific accident precursors they had witnessed while working during the past 60 days. As you can see from this diagram in the upper right, this was to be a permanent monitoring system. I was privileged to be asked to serve as a consultant to the team of superb professionals who've carried out the work done on NAOMS to date. As I watched the team do its work over a period of years, I saw a great deal about how it was done. I look forward to answering your questions, but in the remaining opening moments I have, I'd like to set the record straight on 5 important misunderstandings that have found their way into the public discussion of NAOMS during the past week. First, some people have claimed that the NAOMS methodology was not peer-reviewed. This is incorrect. The survey methods used in NAOMS have been peer-reviewed and widely accepted in the field for more than 40 years. And the NAOMS team used peer-reviewed and well-established evaluation techniques to select the best standard methods for use in the NAOMS surveys. Furthermore, survey research experts at the White House Office of Management and Budget must review every federal survey project to assure that the methods to be used are optimal, and they reviewed and approved the NAOMS methodology. And prior to that approval process, the NAOMS team had held dozens of meetings, workshops, and consultations around the country with aviation experts, interested parties, and social scientists to describe the project's methodology and get reviews, comments, and suggestions. Second, some people have said that NAOMS was not shut down prematurely. This is incorrect. The slide up on the screen shows you that initial NAOMS funding was intended to pay for surveys to be done not only of pilots, but of air traffic controllers, flight attendants, and mechanics. but the funding for NAOMS was ended before that work was initiated. Third, some people have said that the NAOMS project was designed simply to test the feasibility of a method, not to implement that method in a long-term survey monitoring system. This is incorrect. We determined that the method was viable and effective after a field trial involving 635 pilots. You don't do 24,000 interviews of pilots to test the feasibility of a method. You do that many interviews after you know the method is feasible and ready for prime time. Fourth, some people have said that if the NAOMS data were released to the public, individual pilots or airlines would be identifiable. This is incorrect. The overwhelming majority of NAOMS data cannot be linked to any pilot or airline because the system was set up to assure that from the start. The very small number of instances in which a pilot mentioned a specific airline or event date spontaneously can easily be removed from the public data set and made available to analysts only through census data centers, which the federal government created exactly for the purpose of allowing researchers to use highly confidential government data for research purposes while protecting anonymity. Lastly, some people have said that NAOMS data cannot be used to compute the rates at which events happened because multiple respondents might have reported the same event, leading to overestimates. This is incorrect. NAOMS was designed intentionally to collect multiple reports of the same event, and NAOMS was also designed to implement a statistical procedure to recognize this multiple reporting when translating the results of the surveys into computation of event counts. My best guess of why you've heard earlier that event rates are too high in the survey is because that correction is not being implemented properly. Thus, these 5 criticisms of NAOMS are unfounded, and for these many reasons, I believe that NASA deserves terrific praise for initiating NAOMS and for carrying out the work done so far so well. The method offers a new way to complement existing streams of data on aviation safety, and it's relatively cheap and quick compared to the other methods being implemented. So in closing, I want to thank NASA for the decision to make existing NAOMS data available to the public, along with complete documentation on exactly how the data were collected. But most importantly, I want to urge NASA and this committee to restart NAOMS data collection where they left off. There's much left on the diagram on the screen to be done, and if NASA gets to work doing it, there will almost certainly be terrific benefits for this nation, and this committee can take some credit for those benefits if it comes about. NASA did a great job with NAOMS already, and they have a unique position of trust, objectivity, and scientific expertise in the aviation world that will allow them to carry out this work with efficiency and credibility. I hope they will choose to continue this important work in the future. Thank you very much.
Doctor, and Captain McVenes, you're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Hall, members of the committee, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to outline the Airline Pilots Association's views on aviation safety and the role that we play in protecting the traveling public. ALPA is the world's largest pilot union. We represent more than 60,000 pilots at 42 airlines in the United States and Canada. ALPA was founded in 1931, and for more than 76 years now, ALPA has had a tremendous impact on improving aviation safety. Today, ALPA continues to be the world's leading aviation safety advocate, protecting the safety interests of our passengers, our fellow crew members, and cargo around the world. Over the past 10 years, the U.S. aviation industry has seen a 65% decrease in the accident rate. And as a result, the U.S. safety record is the envy of the rest of the world. Much of our success is due to the collaborative approach that has taken place among airline managements, labor, and the FAA in voluntary collection and analysis of de-identified safety-related data. By analyzing recorded data that's obtained during routine flight operations and receiving written reports from the frontline employees in a confidential and non-punitive environment, we can not only see what is happening out there, but also why it is happening. Today, these standalone programs at individual airlines are reaching their maturity, and that's a reflection of the dynamic nature of any data collection effort. And it has to adapt to changes in the environment, and in this case, the changes in the aviation industry. As safety professionals continue to see value in these programs and work with them in more detail, it's become clear that even more can be learned by sharing safety information among various stakeholders in the industry. The FAA and the airline industry, including ALPA, continue to work together on developing a formalized process in which safety information can be accessed through secure networks, under mutually agreeable rules of engagement. ELPA has been working closely with the FAA, NASA, and the airlines to develop a process that will make this safety information available to decision makers to help them in their efforts to manage risk. This process is also invaluable in the sharing of accident and incident prevention strategies across the entire industry. Again, though, I would point out that as time goes on, the industry continues to refine our processes for maximizing the safety benefits that the traveling public receives from collecting data, while at the same time protecting those employees and the airlines that bring the data to the table in the first place. NASA, especially through the Aviation Safety Reporting System, or ASRS, has always been an important player in aviation safety. Its human factors research in particular has provided great value to our industry. The NAOMS survey was part of the early effort to provide more information to help all of us improve aviation safety. And this first survey was a test of the process and methodology, and we understand that the data extracted from this survey were summarized, and those summaries were shared with government and industry. But as in any first test, the data didn't correlate very well with data from other sources, possibly due to the mix of general aviation and airline operations. The aviation community had plans to further analyze those discrepancies and determine if the data was reliable. But the funding for NAOMS ran out, and that's when ELPA stepped in to help keep that project alive as part of our involvement with the Commercial Aviation Safety Team, or CAST. And while we've been working with CAST to modify that survey, we did not receive any collected data from NASA. So what should we do with the data now? Now, there's several solutions that are available. We've heard some of them this afternoon. But the one that makes a lot of sense is to provide NASA with the necessary resources so it can complete its peer review of the data, then analyze that data, while at the same time maintain the confidentiality and protective provisions that apply to voluntarily supplied safety information. Other solutions may also exist, but regardless of the solution, it's important to keep in mind that raw data distributed without appropriate analysis and scrutiny to ensure its validity can lead to unintended consequences. Incomplete or inaccurate conclusions can be reached if the collection method is flawed, or if people looking at the data aren't familiar with aviation or the context of how that information was provided. No one knows and understands the data better than the stakeholders that provided the data in the first place. That is why it is so important that those stakeholders work closely with the analysts of the data, and this will ensure accurate and meaningful conclusions can be reached. Just as importantly, if raw data is simply dumped onto the general public without the quality controls I've mentioned, it would undermine the confidence that pilots and the airline community that have voluntarily and confidentially supplied data on other sources. We have to make sure that that confidentiality remains secure. Now, as an airline captain, one who represents the safety interests of 60,000 other airline pilots, I'm concerned that this could very well erode the very programs that have driven the excellent safety record of airline travel that the public has come to rely on. Thank you, and again for the opportunity to testify today, and I'll be pleased to address any questions you may have.
Thank you, Captain McVenes. Dr. Krosnick, is it fair to summarize a portion of your testimony by saying that when the methodology and the program was set up, the NAOMS program, that it was set up in a way that the confidentiality of the material would be protected? And if that was the case, and I think that, again, that NASA certified that when they said that they set it up by saying we have no means for, anyway, they assured us in their report that would be the case. So how long should it take them to get that information to us?
I would think less than a week to assure that any incidental open-ended responses in the file don't happen to mention an airport or an airline. The director mentioned the idea of eliminating fields in the data set. I would think the normal federal procedure would be to redact words rather than entire fields of data. Well,
I would hope that NASA would hear your testimony and that The end of the year is a worst-case scenario, and next week is a best-case scenario. Also, Dr. Krosnick, the purpose of the NAOMS was to go beyond the event-driven or so-called accident-deterrent response syndrome to aviation safety and develop a statistical, valid database for safety-related events for decision makers. It was specifically designed to overcome the shortcomings of the voluntary anecdotal aviation safety reporting system, which couldn't be used to tell anyone how often certain events occurred. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's exactly right. That the ASRS system relies on pilots to voluntarily choose to fill out a form and mail it in when they feel an event has occurred that merits that. And certainly plenty of forms are filled out and mailed in every year. But because it's voluntary, there's every reason to believe that many events that occur do not get reported through that system. So the purpose of NAOMS was to assure that with a representative sample of pilots who were interviewed every week of every year, that it would be possible to count up events in many categories that never get described in reports to ASRS.
And was it successful in doing so?
Well, we can't quite answer that question, can we? What we know is that we designed, I should say the team designed with my help, a superb methodology and implemented it with the approval of OMB, which is a pretty tough critic of survey methods in the federal government. And so we can believe in the method, but when the data come back, the next step is to analyze those data fully, write reports, have those reports peer-reviewed, and proceed ahead with assessments of validity, which we would have loved to do if the funding hadn't been shut down early.
Well, it seems to me that this was an extraordinary high percentage of return. And you mentioned, what did you, was it 40,000 commercial pilots? What would you
24,000 commercial pilots interviewed.
Right, I understand that, but how many are there in total?
Oh, in the population?
Yes.
I'll defer to Bob Dodd on that. Or
maybe Captain McVenes. Approximately what number of commercial pilots are there?
There's probably roughly 100,000 commercial pilots in the U.S.
So, it's to me, a fourth that responded voluntarily is an incredible number and should be
well. Let's if you don't mind, let's be careful about that.
Okay.
It's actually not 24,000 pilots who were interviewed. It's 24,000 interviews were conducted. So we drew statistical samples of very small numbers of pilots to be interviewed each week.
How many would you say? How many different pilots would have been interviewed?
It's about 8,000 a year,
which is still an exceptionally large.
Right. Much bigger than most
sampling.
surveys. Absolutely.
Yeah. And was it intended to be a continuing permanent database or just a short-term experiment?
Well, the slide that I showed earlier that NASA displayed at all of the public meetings that we did early on indicated that it was planned to be a permanent monitoring system.
Well, and I hope that we can get it up and running. I think, again, let me once again state that the United States of America has the safest air transportation system in the world. And I think part of that reason, as Mr. Hall said it earlier, was because of the transparency of continuing to try to do things better. And this is just one more effort to raise that extraordinarily high bar, or I won't say raise it any higher, but keep it there. I thank you, and Mr. Hall is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Captain McVenes, you said regardless of the solution, it's important to keep in mind that raw data distributed without appropriate analysis and scrutiny to ensure its validity can lead to unintended consequences. Actually, sir, we've heard from several researchers that commercial and general aviation pilots were very receptive and even were very eager to share their experiences and views with NASA researchers, in part because they were told that they'd be anonymous and would be protected. So how confident are you that releasing the data with confidential information removed, as described by Administrator Griffin, will not hinder pilots from participating in future surveys?
Well, the confidentiality piece is so very important. Because it's what makes that transparency happen. It makes people want to report, knowing that information is going to be used proactively in a safety-related type of activity, as opposed to some other activity of any sort of sensationalism or whatever it may be. So that's why it's very important to keep that flow of information coming. And the reason that we've been successful as an industry to get a lot of voluntary participation in these programs, whether it's the NAOMS survey or the individual programs that are going on at our airlines, is because that information is used proactively. It's not used in a punitive type of environment. It's used for safety purposes, and that's why that's so important.
And Mr. Dodd, you and Dr. Krosnick were shaking your head, indicating that you agree with his.
That's correct.
Yeah, I think it's very important that confidentiality never be compromised. And the good news is for everyone here that the survey data were collected in a way so that no one could identify the pilots. In other words, the data are in electronic files that do not have the identities of the pilots in them. And so there are 24,000 rows of numbers indicating the answers that they gave to statistical questions, but not in any way indicating their name, phone number, or identity in any other way. So that's the good news.
And I think the chairman, in his inquiry to you, asked you, in your testimony, you state that NAOMS was always envisioned to continue operating, and whether or not this was planned to be continued at NASA or at another government agency like the FAA. How was it? Who did finish it that last year?
Well, all of the work on NAOMS to date has been done by NASA. And so my understanding is that there was a planned attempt at a handoff of the methodology to ALPA. The plan, as you've heard already from the chairman, was to switch from telephone interviewing, which we had determined to be the most reliable way to make these measurements, over to internet data collection, where respondents could go to a website and answer questionnaires there. Unfortunately, a test of that methodology was carried out by NASA, and as I understand it, was unfortunately quite a failure, that hardly any pilots participated in the internet version of the survey. And I'm not surprised by that, because our research methods literature suggests that respondents of this sort are far more likely to participate if the telephone call method is used. So my personal concern at the moment is the only plans I've heard for ALPA possibly to pick up this project are with this methodology, which is already shown to be not feasible. But more importantly, I guess I share perhaps the implication of what you're suggesting, and that is that I don't know that this is an operation that can work effectively outside of government. And I think it's particularly important to recognize, as I said in my comments, that NASA is really trusted by pilots, as I'm sure Dr. McVenes will acknowledge, because the ASRS has been so successful in collecting very detailed information that's made public and that reveals a lot about the details of bad things that go on. We heard earlier a transcript of a pilot talking about falling asleep in the cockpit. That's a pretty scary story, and that's on the internet for anyone to read. And so, you know, the possibility that that information being revealed to the public and its benefits seems clearly to outweigh the possibility that someone could get in trouble, because NASA has successfully protected people from that. And I believe NASA has the trust and credibility with pilots to continue to do that.
Doctor, thank you. And I'll ask any of the three of you, do you all know why FAA didn't pick up the project? Why didn't they pick the project up?
Well, I don't think we originally planned for FAA to pick up the project, and what Dr. Krosnick was addressing is key to that issue, and that is NASA has a reputation among the pilot community of protecting their identity. The Aviation Safety Reporting System, which you've heard referenced a number of times today, is a program that's been in existence for 30 years. During that time, not one pilot's confidentiality has been compromised. There's never been any reverse engineering where somebody's gone into the report and been able to identify who the reporter was. And because of that, NASA was chosen to be the primary and best government agency to do this work because of that reputation. The FAA's mission is slightly different, and of course the FAA is responsible for enforcement and certification of pilots. And because of that, pilots may be unwilling to voluntarily report issues that might result in them getting a slap on the hand, if you will, or what we call a certificate action. So historically, surveys run by the FAA among the pilot community don't have a very high response rate, which is one of the metrics that we use to evaluate how well we're doing with the surveying. As an aside, with this particular survey that NASA did with NAOMS, we had an 85% acceptance rate among the pilots contacted who agreed to do the survey. That's an exceptionally high response rate and gives us confidence that the pilots were willing to meaningfully engage in the process.
Thank you. My time really has expired. I yield back any time I have or don't have.
Not much, Mr. Hall. The Space and Aeronautics Subcommittee Chairman, Mr. Udall, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I want to thank the panel for your compelling and insightful testimony. Mr. Dodd, if I could focus on a part of your testimony to start with. You stated, I want to get this right, I believe that NAOMS should be reinstituted and operated by an independent and unbiased organization. Should NAOMS be operated by NASA, some other organization? What would you recommend?
I think there's a number of suitable organizations, and it would depend on a number of issues. I think Dr. Krosnick's observation that this is inherently a government type of activity is absolutely correct. So I would not hazard to recommend what agencies might be appropriate. I think NASA at the working staff level did an outstanding job with this project, and they have the technical expertise to do that. So I certainly would have no objections from NASA continuing to do this work. So certainly that would be one agency that fits my definition.
The other panelists care to comment on that question?
Yeah, well, I agree, of course, that NASA is suitable, as I've suggested already in my comments, and from the extensive learning I've benefited from about the airline operation and industry, it's hard for me to identify another organization from my many hours talking with pilots that the practitioners would have the same confidence in. To some degree, there is specialization in these federal agencies, and the FAA is particularly good at collecting large electronic databases from machines. NASA's specialty in this area has been activities like ASRS, where humans are reporting their experiences. So to some degree, NAOMS fits very nicely under the NASA umbrella. And I agree with Dr. Dodd that NASA has done a wonderful job with this project and has earned the recognition that they deserve, I think, by that quality of work, and why not let them continue?
And certainly from our perspective, having NASA continue with the project, is we certainly wouldn't object to. Our role in the whole thing was to keep it alive in whatever way we could. And to Mr. Hall's point is, why FAA didn't take it over directly. Kind of indirectly, they were involved with it in the fact that in their work with the commercial aviation safety team, as well as the rest of the industry, we were trying to utilize that group as a way to keep this thing going and involve all the stakeholders, including the FAA in this.
And before I turn to you, Captain, for the second and final question, to editorialize briefly, and my colleague Congressman Lipinski asked a question in the earlier round, the first panel, why did NASA stop? What was underway here? And it is curious, but setting that aside, I want to thank you, Captain, for your willingness to testify on such short notice in front of the committee. And I was struck by one of your statements, which read, NASA has always been an important player in aviation safety. Its human factors research, in particular, provided great value to our industry. At subcommittee hearings that I've chaired earlier this year, we've heard numerous concerns raised about the cutbacks on the NASA human factors R&D programs in recent years, particularly in the applied areas. Have you heard these same concerns raised, and do you share them? And after the captain's finished, if the other two panelists would care to comment, I'd sure appreciate it.
Yeah, we were concerned. I know we wrote several letters from our president to various groups here in Washington to try to change the mind of those that controlled the purse strings over that, because we saw a great value in the human factors research that was going on, especially as it applied to some of the automation changes that were taking place in our aircraft. And so that's why we were very interested in trying to keep that alive as best we could. This is an important part of aviation, especially the future of aviation, as we continue to evolve with new technologies, so that we understand what that human element is in the role of how we fly our airplanes, and NASA played a very big role in that in the past. And unfortunately, they're not doing as much anymore as we feel they should be.
I agree, and if you look at the slide that's still up on the screen, you'll see that was an ambitious work plan for a great deal of research to be carried out over a long period of time, and the budget that was established for that work in the beginning was appropriately generous to cover the costs at an A-plus quality level. But that budget shrank regularly during the years and contracted for reasons we were not informed about, such that in the end there was not money available to pay for most of that work to be done, and it was that sort of choking off of the project that accounts for the incompletion of the work. And I think, you know, you're perhaps pointing to a larger issue at NASA about changing priorities and changing budgets in a way that Bob is actually even more informed about than I am.
The only additional
Mr. Chairman, if I might use some of Mr. Hall's remaining time for Mr. Dodd to comment.
Okay. Very quickly, the NASA Human Factors Program, we saw it while we were involved with the NAOMS project of year by year having funding removed from the program, and we saw it at the local level and saw the pain that it caused among the staff at NASA Ames. The other thing I want to point out is that aviation is an incredibly labor-intensive activity. I won't go through all the activities that are involved with it, but human factors is key. It's usually human error that's associated with most of our major problems, and we need to continue to fund that research and that focus on that because it's not going to go away.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sir, your time has expired, and now the Vice Chairman of the Science and Technology Committee, Mr. Lipinski, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Gordon. I want to thank all of our witnesses for their testimony today, especially Captain McVenes, as Mr. Udall said. I know you did this on short notice. We appreciate that. Dr. Krosnick, I'm not sure if you remember, 14 years ago, I think it was, I did the summer program in political psychology at Ohio State University.
There we go.
And so I've known you for going back many years there, and I certainly have a great deal of respect for your work. I wanted to sort of keep going down the line of what I started on earlier with the first panel. I asked them to put the timeline up there. I asked you, Dr. Krosnick, because I think I heard this earlier. I was in my office listening to the testimony, and when I heard this, I decided I had to come and run back here to ask some questions. Where did the process stop in this timeline?
I think Dr. Dodd is the best person to describe it.
We basically, 2003 is when we really had the plug pulled on us. One of the things I should clarify is that NASA had a 5-year program from a budgeting point of view for this project and many others. And so when you hear NASA saying that there was an end point for this particular project, it was because of a 5-year budgeting exercise, and that the project was not continued outside of that budget for the next cycle. It stopped in 2003, essentially, as far as continuing development. In 2002, we were getting ready for air traffic controllers. We did 3 focus groups of 15 air traffic controllers each, and we had about a 1.5-year development cycle planned for the development of the air traffic controller questionnaire. We briefed NATCA. They were very receptive to the idea, and at that point is when we stopped ATC development, and it was because of the funding issues. Clearly, we're going to be cut back at that point, and so we dropped that out of the plan at that point. The ATC, we didn't have the money for the development. We focused on continuing the pilot survey.
That is even more information than I was aware of, but it fits perfectly into my question, and none of you, I believe, can answer this, but I have questions that I asked Dr. Griffin, and I think he was mistaken about there not being, the program not being interrupted at a certain point, that it had, gone its full course. Certainly there have been issues involving air traffic controllers and the FAA. That is a major issue, something that we have been dealing with, trying to get dealt with in the Transportation Committee. It is a big labor issue, and it seems to me that what Mr. Dodd just said seems to fit with possibly when it was time to actually go and do the survey of the air traffic controllers. That is where this stopped. And so I really would like to, Mr. Chairman, I think that's an important point to look at, because when it comes down to it, safety is the most important thing, and the whole purpose of this was for safety. It's $11 million, the 6 years that was spent on it, but what can we do to improve safety? I'm not going to say the sky is falling, literally, but as you said, Mr. Chairman, it is just trying to make a safe system even safer, and I just want to leave out there I don't know if Mr. Dodd or anyone else has any other comments on that, but the possibility of it got to be a place where the FAA perhaps did not want to go with the survey of the air traffic controllers at that time, and that's where this stopped. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything to that, or we would just leave it there. So, any witnesses want to add anything to that?
I really can't comment because I don't know what the FAA decision-making was on that type, or senior NASA management as far as funding decisions. I'm sure that there were probably other issues as part of that process, and other than that, I can't comment.
Thank you. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Lipinski, and my thanks to our witnesses today for their time and expertise. And Dr. Krosnick, I hope you will make yourself available and your expertise to NASA if they need you to help do this final, cleaning, if there is any need to be, of this list. And if there is no objection, the record will remain open for additional statements from the members and for answers to any follow-up questions the committee may ask of the witnesses. Without objection, so ordered.